Sundays catch the ride. Football hoops we break it wide. Stats and facts, truth on high. SWAT talk where the convo's real. From Texas to Florida, we seal the deal. Just pull up, the vibes are real. Chopping it up, we spin the wheel. Hit the corner of the field, we strategize. Breaking the game down, no disguise. Play by play, we analyze. I wear sharp, we magnify. SWAT talk where the convo's real. From Texas to Florida, we seal the deal. Just pull up, the vibes are real. Chopping it up, we spin the wheel. Wednesdays heat, Sundays ignite. We talking legends shining bright. Back and forth, day or night. This the plug, we bring the light. SWAT talk where the convo's real. From Texas to Florida, we seal the deal. Cats pull up, the vibes are real. Chopping it up, we spin the wheel.
All right, everybody, what's going on, man? How y'all doing? Welcome to today's edition of Swag Talk. This is the show we cover the swag inside and out. Of course, I am your tour guide around the swag. See what's coming at you. And today, we're gonna have a little fun and do a little look back. And we, just for context and everything, obviously this season for Southern has been really bad. So I wanted to kind of take a look back and see how bad it really has been comparatively to some of the other bad seasons that Southern has had. So we're gonna kind of take a look at that and just I'm not gonna really spend a lot of time on this year's team because obviously I got other videos that my thoughts on this year's team. You can find them, and of course during the course of recaps and previews, you'll get my thoughts on this year's team. But I do want to say just a couple things for this little video. First off, I describe a bad season as 3 wins or less. 4 wins is not a good season, but depending on how many games you play, that's either 1 or 2 games below 500. So it's not good. Obviously, it's not mediocre. It's bad, but it's not that bad. So I consider anything 3 wins or less to be a bad season. Also, of course, we know using context that you're comparing different eras and different styles of football. So none of this is gonna be a 1-to-1 comparison. So I don't want to look at it like that. I'm taking into account the style of football that was played in these days, and all of that. So just looking at this through different lenses um, can give you a different perspective with respect to some of the older things, and that also kind of changes the way you look at the newer stuff. When you look at it in comparison, it may come out even worse when you look at it in terms of modern stuff. So we're just gonna, like I said, we're just gonna go through and just take a look back, and we'll do this chronologically. I started at 1935 because the database I used, I think they went back to the early 30s. So we started at 1935 and moving up to today. So that's 100. That's basically 90 years of football. If my math is correct. So that's a long chunk. That's a long chunk of football, and basically Southern has had not a lot of horrible seasons in their history. I would describe most of Southern seasons, if they weren't championship level seasons, then they were average seasons. Southern's typically, when you look back, Southern's a team that wins anywhere between 4 and 7 games a lot. So they're not necessarily a team that's always on top. They have their spurts, but they're not necessarily a team that's really down. So they kind of always fluctuating in that mid range to upward, and not really staying in the doldrums for long. And the one thing I did see from looking at this, there's only 2 times that there were back-to-back bad seasons. And typically those came off of a good season. and then they kind of had a couple season lull, and then they got back right. That happened in 35 and 36 and 71 and 72. 77 was also a bad season. So the 70s Southern had three bad seasons, one in the 80s, one in the 2010s, and then um, this season. So starting in 1935 with all that out the way, this team was, I don't care what era you look at, this team was bad. This team was very bad. Um, in 10 games, they went 2-7-1, so they had a tie. They finished with 106 total points on the season, giving them an average of 10.6 points per game. His offense was shut out 5 times, so they really struggled scoring points in this year. Defensively, they weren't that bad in terms of points allowed. Again, you got to look at the era that they were in. They gave up 16.7 points per game, 167 points allowed. That's actually a winning defensive number when you look at it, especially when you kind of transfer that to today's football. That's not so bad to give up 16 points a game on defense, but when your offense only scoring 10, that's gonna really kill you. And this team started off getting shut out 20-0 by Langston. They also lost to Bishop 40-0. They lost to Wiley 30-40-0. They did pitch a shutout over Samuel Huston 20-0. Then they followed up with back-to-back shutouts to Texas College and Pine Bluff 27-0 and 8-0. They tied Prairie View 6-6, and then they beat Grambling 64-6. So they scored the bulk of their points in one game. So as a Jaguar, I'm gonna give them a little bit of a bonus for putting a 60 piece on Grambling with an offense that has scored um 36 points. Basically 36 points. No, 8, 28, 40, 42 points. Um 42 points over the course of the other 9 games. So that they really came together for that one game and took it all out on the Tigers. But that's still a very bad offense when you get shut out 5 times. Um, but your defense never really gave up a ton of points. You only gave up more than more than 27 points 3 times. So defensively they weren't that bad, but offensively they were horrible. And obviously getting shut out 5 times would do that to you. Next up is 1936. This offense was a little bit better. They averaged 16.7 points per game, scoring 151 total points per game. Uh, I think I messed up the defensive numbers because that don't look right. I'm gonna have to kind of look at it. But they scored 151 total points, and they went 3-5-1 in 9 games. So improved by one win, but they did get shut out a couple of times. They got shut out 4 times, including a 0-0 tie to Alcorn. Um, Looking at the numbers, this defense did not give up a lot of points, so it's weird that they didn't win a lot of games. Um, they gave up, if these scores are correct, they gave up 73 points as a defense. This is the first team I've ever seen in my life that had a losing season and outscored their opponents almost double. So they they gave up 73 points, 8.1 points per game. This is a very odd team. Just looking at their schedule, they opened up their season getting shut out by Alcorn. Nothing. I mean, but yeah, they had a 0-0 tie against Alcorn. Um, they shut out Bishop. Well, they beat Bishop 20-6. They lost to Pine Bluff 13-6. They lost to Wiley 18-0. They beat Grambling 36-0. They lost to Texas College 3-0. They beat Jarvis Christian 82-7. And then they lost to Prairie View 13-0, and then Langston 13-7. So this was a defense that never gave up more than 18 points in a game, and you still only won 3 games, and you got shut out quite a few times. So this was an odd team. That team is a half a team. So I don't really consider them to be as bad because their defense was actually elite in that time period. And offense really wasn't nothing to write home about, but they weren't as horrible as the previous season. So I kind of, I would kind of, if I had to put these teams anywhere, I would probably put this team toward the top of the bad team list. When I say the top, I mean the least worst of the bad. Um, they were bad, but they weren't bad. Next up is 1971. They went 3-7 in 10 games. They had an average of 14.2 points per game, scored 142 total points. They also gave up 232 points on the season, which is a 23.2 point average, which again is not really bad for a team with a losing record. I mean, obviously, you give up over 20 points a game, you really kind of giving up the points. But this team only got shut out once, and the defense they pitched the shutout. So both extremes. Um, they lost to Texas Southern 21-0, Prairie View 21-3. They beat Valley 14-0. They lost to Pine Bluff 28-27. They lost to Jackson State 49-28. They lost to Alcorn 30-14. They lost to Tennessee State 27-16. They beat FAMU 13-9. They lost to Grambling 31-3, and they beat North Carolina A&T 24-16. So this was a team that they just couldn't really get over the hump when you look at kind of the scores. Um, this team is in a way it's kind of similar score wise to this Southern team. You see a lot of 16, 17 point games. The offense kind of gets stymied out at a certain point. They did score over 20 points 3 times that season, which is basically where this team is right now. Um, so kind of similar to this current season. The defense had some better efforts score wise, and like I said, without knowing numbers and stuff in terms of stats, which these teams I know for Southern in these years were primarily running teams. Their offense probably wasn't that great at moving the ball, but defensively they were decent enough to keep them in games. They just couldn't get over the hump. Next up is 1972, and this is probably I would put this team and the 35 team, and probably even this year's team as probably the 3 teams that I would consider the worst in Southern football. Now, this season team still got a couple games that never know what might happen, but this team was the worst team in terms of scoring. They averaged 9.7 points per game, scoring 97 total points in 10 games. They went 2-7-1, which is tied for the worst. I think that's the worst win percentage out of it, out of everybody. Um, so again, this was not a good season. The defense only gave up 21.9 points per game, which is 219 points allowed. So again, the defense was okay. And if you kind of translated that, again, you got to account for pace and tempo and passing the ball and all that stuff, and other modern methods. But when you look at that number in terms of today's swag football, that will put that defense scoring wise as one of the top defenses in the conference. So again, different time period, but just putting that number there, that would actually make this defense the third rated defense in the league in scoring defense. So that ain't that bad. Obviously, most people probably was in that same range back in them days. But again, this team won 2 games. They did have a tie. And so they had their rough patches. They got shut out 3 times. Well, they forfeited against Grambling. I don't know what happened with that one, but they have a 2-0 forfeit, but they're still a shutout. Um, they did not score a lot of points. Again, like I said, they averaged 9 points a game, which is the lowest on this list, and I think it'll probably stay the lowest unless Southern doesn't score points in the next 3 games. I don't think they'll be able to. I don't think that number will be topped. But again, this team only scored more than 20 points 2 times. 24 in their first game against Tuskegee, which they won 24-19. They lost to Texas Southern 37-0. They beat Prairie View 20-7. They lost to Valley 23-13. They tied Pine Bluff at 7. They lost to Jackson State 22-17. They lost to Alcorn 40-3. They lost to Tennessee State 35-0. And they lost to FAMU 27-13. And then that was their forfeit against Grambling 2-0. So this was a team, and this team was looked like they was on the way to a pretty decent season. They opened up 2-1, and then they had you can say they opened up 2-2, and then they had a tie, and then they lost their remaining 5 games. So they kind of fell off the cliff after the Prairie View game. They just couldn't offense just couldn't get it going, and so I would like I said I would put this again. I would put this team as one of just because of the offense. I would put this team as one of the worst teams that Southern has had. When you look at it, I mean they had probably one of the worst records um, in terms of winning percentage in the history of Southern. So not good. Just that's horrible. I was trying to see if I could find the winning percentages for. All right, so that 2-7-1 record will give them a winning percentage of uh 26%. So that actually is not the worst winning percentage. The worst winning percentage they had would be coming up later. So right now, I think Southern is on pace to beat that if things continue to go the way they're going. But at this point, as you can see, 72 was a horrible year. And so I would probably, again, 72 and 35 are the worst teams that I can see so far. Looking at 77, we can kind of say that this team, again, was one of those teams that was probably more average than not. They played. This was the first time on this list that a team played 11 games. They went 3-7-1. So again, you could have been 4. You could have been 4-7, or you could have been 3-8. If you won or lost that tie game, so you could have not been on this list, or you could have stayed on this list. But they averaged 14.8 points per game, which is the second most out of this list so far. 163 total points, was shut out 2 times. Defense gave up 21.9 points per game, just like the previous season. 241 points allowed um, in 11 games. So again, the defense seemed to be doing pretty well. Offense was probably the issue with this team for a lot of years. Um, like I said, they got shut out back-to-back weeks to Jackson State and Alcorn. Um, couldn't really get a lot of points going. They did score 46 against Prairie View. That was a season high. The other 2 times they crossed 20 points was against Grambling, which they lost their game 55-20, and 28 points against Bishop, which they won 28-3. Other than that, they had a 13-7 win. That's a game they could have probably won either way. They had a 14-14 tie against Texas Southern. They lost to Valley 36-13. They lost to Tennessee State 15-7. Again, that's a game that probably could have won either way. Howard was a 2-score game, 26-10. FAMU 19-6. So they had some relatively close games, or at least games that a play here, play there that could have been in. So this is a team that probably don't really deserve to be on this list, but they are because their record and the offense wasn't that great. This is probably one of again, I'll probably put this team a little bit higher on the worst list because they were more snake bit, it seems, than any other team. The rest of those teams so far were just bad. I think this team could have probably had been better. I love to know kind of like the backstory of that team if they had injuries or something that kind of handicapped them a little bit. But moving on to 1981, this team went 3-8. And they finished with 184 total points. They were shut out 2 times. They had an average of 16.7 points per game. Defense gave up 24.1 points per game, 266 points allowed again. Not a bad number defensively. Um, that would actually make them fourth in the league right now. So that's not, again, that's not, when you just take numbers and put numbers with numbers, it's not bad. But when you probably compare it to what was going on back then, probably wasn't really great. But they pitched two shutouts, and even though they got shut out two times, this defense pitched two shutouts. They had a 3-0 victory over Bethune-Cookman. They lost to Texas Southern 13-7. Again, that's a game that probably could have went either way. They beat Prairie View 35-0. They lost to Valley 21-16, another one-score game. Nichols 55-14, Jackson State 41-0, Alcorn 18-0, Tennessee State 28-10, Southeastern 28-27. That's a one-score game. FAMU 41-14 and Grambling 50-20. Um, so this team could have won 5 games because they had a couple. They had about, let's see, they had two basically one score games that they lost. Now they did. Now they had 3 one-score games that they lost. So this team could have won 6 games, but you could also flip that Bethune-Cookman game, and they could have won. They could have only won 2 games. So this again is not a team that's necessarily bad. Like I said, they had some bad luck losing close games. They were pretty competitive against some of the better teams. And because when they lost, they lost. But again, they were able to score points in most games. And I would probably put this team kind of in the worst, the best of the worst category, because they probably, I would honestly say this team in '81 was probably the closest thing to a a, a good team that's on this list. Like I said, they had some bad breaks and looked like they could have kind of gotten it going if they could have won a couple of them close games, and they would not have been on this list. So they um they are basically okay. Next up is 2010, and for a long time in my estimation, in my memory, this was probably the worst team that I had seen. I mean, because this is the worst team that I had seen in my life, because I was born in '76, so I was 1 when, in the '77 season, and I was 5 in the '81 season. So you don't really know what you're looking at that point. I was at games probably both of them years. I know I was at a lot of the '81 games, but you don't know what you're looking at. So this 2010 team was the worst team that I had seen in my eyes in my lifetime, and they, comparatively to a lot of these groups, they weren't that bad. The offense scored 22 points per game, and for a 2-19 to score 22 points per game, you're doing something right, but you're also doing something really wrong. And so they scored 243 points per game. The defense gave up 33.8 points per game, which is the most so far on this list. 372 points allowed. 11 games, went 2-9. And like I said, this is, when I think of the worst Southern teams that I know of, this was it. And it's not, I don't know if it's necessarily the actual losses, but it's kind of who and how they lost. Like I said, they opened up with a win over Delaware State, 37-27, and I was like, this team gonna run through the SWAC. Came home the next week, lost 31-7 to Arkansas Monticello. That right there lets you know where you stand. 34-14 lost to Alabama A&M, 41-23 lost to Pine Bluff, beat Valley 38-20, lost to Jackson State 49-45. I still don't know how Southern scored 45 points in that game. Prairie View beat them 36-16. They they lost to Alcorn 27-20. They lost to Texas Southern 54-7. They lost to Alabama State 21-19, and they lost to Grambling 38-17. So they're two. I mean, they did trail Delaware State for a good portion of that game, but their 2 wins were by comfortable margins at least. So I don't really think that you can really flip either one of them. But they had a couple one-score games, and they did have that Jackson State game. They were in the lead late before they gave up a big score at the end. So that's a game if you want to, you want to play the if game. You could do that one. 7 point loss to Alcorn, same. 2 point loss to Alabama State. So they did have some close games, but they did have some stinkers too. So this team to me it is bad, but again, they're not that bad. When you look at it in comparison to everything else, it was really bad because Southern had been on a run of at least 6 wins for a while, and then it cratered that season. But they did have some decent games in there. Um, they just really couldn't stop anybody more than anything. Um, so again, I think this is a team that I would put on that they bad, but they're not bad list. Um, and that takes us to this season, which again, like I said, this team is 1-8, and they are basically flirting with having the worst record in history of Southern, as far as I know. I don't know, past the 30s, but at least from 30s to now, they flirting with the worst record in the history of that. They could potentially finish 1-11. I mean, the way they playing, they could honestly lose their last 3 games. So that would put them at 1-11, and record wise, that would make this the worst team in the in Southern history. Um, Obviously, again, some things a little different here and there. But the one thing, and like I said, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this team because we done a lot, but just for the sake of the video, I'm gonna do what I did for everybody else. Offense 16.4 points per game, 148 total points. That's boosted because of the 35 points they scored against FAMU and the 21 they scored last week. Before that, they had only scored more than 20 points once. So this is an offense that could not score points. Defense 37.5 points per game in 9 games. Um, that's obviously the worst on this list. 338 points allowed, like I said, in the 9 games that they played, and they've given up points every game. 24 is the least that they've given up. Um, so this bears watching, in that way, because like I said, I don't really think that this team is gonna get much better before it ends. So we are witnessing history. It's not good history, but it's history. So I kind of wanted to just put that put that out there. And when I say Southern's on a pace, I want you to know what they competing against. And so, this was a mixed bag. There were a couple of really bad teams. Like I said, I would say on this list there were 3 teams there are 3 teams that are really bad, 35-72 in this season, even though the point total for the offense is the third highest in terms of the offense. But they had the worst scoring defense on this list. They're on pace to have the worst record as a whole on this list. They're gonna play 12 games, so they could go 1-11. Um, and defensively, like I said, they give up the most points, and they have 2 close games, one win, one loss. So this is a team that was blowed out in almost every game they played. The only team I think was closer to that was probably the 35 team that got shut out 5 times. So obviously, modern era, this is the worst team that's been at Southern. Um, Historically, it's top 3. If they keep losing, they'll be number 1 with a bullet. But like I said, I wanted to put this together because I had been messing around with this, um, just to kind of see. Because in my mind frame, I was using the Stump Mitchell days as a barometer. But when I started looking at those teams, they scored points. Not a lot of points, but they scored points. I mean, those teams probably would beat this team. Um, if you just look at the numbers. Um, And so that's what kind of made me start to look back. And I first just started looking at the offensive side of things. And then I was like, well, let me see what what the defense is doing, because a lot of times if your offense ain't scoring, you're obviously not going to win games. But if if you're bad, your defense should be giving up a lot of points. And the defense was all over the place in this time in this video. So that's why, like I said, I think 35-72 and this season are the top three worst teams. And we'll see. Um, if I had to rank them 1, 2, 3, I would probably go 30. I would probably go 35. Number one, 72, 3, 72, number two, and this year, number 3 right now. Um, but that number could easily change in the next couple of weeks. So with that being said, man, I'm up out of here again. We're gonna be live Saturday night after the games. Swag Smoke, like I said, we haven't been able to bring it to y'all, so we're gonna give y'all a post game episode. Um, and then Sunday, week 11 recap. Monday, I'm aiming for my basketball preview. Next Wednesday will be the week 12 preview, and so on and so on. So y'all make sure y'all hit that like button on the way out, and hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. We almost to 1,500. I think we need like 10 more to get to 1,500. So if y'all can hit that subscribe button and get us to that hump, that would be greatly appreciated. And we'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace.